Hi, everybody. It's Ben Callahan from The Question and Redwoods and Sparkbox, and I am here with my friend Pegah. Thank you so much, Pegah, for being here. I know we just finished the deep dive, so to jump right back on a call and sort of explore some of the things we're learning, I know that's a lot for one day, but thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Ben. I really enjoy the conversation. I really appreciate this space that you're creating for these deeper topics to be discussed because typically what I see across the industry, the conversation are more about like efficiency, velocity, technical aspects, tooling. And this is a very unique and rare space that you have created that we can not only raise the questions and the answer, like hear the answers from the community. I really enjoy that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a unique place. I feel a little bit like I kind of just stumbled on this in a streak of luck, but we've got a lot of amazing folks in the community that are very sort of thoughtful in the way they tackle a difficult topic like this. So let me introduce the topic quickly. So the title for this week is The Ethics of Design Systems. And as Pegah and I were chatting about this, we landed on just a few questions to ask the community. Those were, one, do you believe that design systems carry some kind of ethical responsibility? Two, do ethics play a part in your daily design system work? Three, why or why not? And then four, how do you measure trust in your design system? And so we got a lot of answers from folks, just a fascinating, led to a fascinating conversation. We sent this out to over 1,000 folks, 1,011 design system practitioners. We got 44 answers. And as always, you can go and dig into the raw data and look at the answers yourself. I'll make sure that wherever this is posted, there's a link to the FigJam file that we're looking at here on screen, the raw data, and any other assets or resources that we come up with here. So the answers to the first two questions were very, very heavy on the yeses, right? And I think we talked a little bit about this in the call, but I don't know exactly what I expected to see, but we got a significant number of folks who were like, yes, systems carry some kind of ethical responsibility. I think that's kind of what you were expecting too. Is that right, Pegah?
It is true. I kind of was expecting that, but it turned out to be even more overwhelmingly positive and almost unanimously yes answers. So I really appreciate that it just confirmed my assumption. Now with the caveat that we don't know who exactly took this, survey, it might have been mostly people who are actually interested in this topic. So
Yeah.
take it with a grain of salt, I would say.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really fair. And we try to mention that every time we do one of these calls, which is that this is not statistically significant, just the beginning of a conversation, right? Like some kindling for a good spicy convo. And that's kind of what we get here. Um, and the second question was, do ethics play a part in your daily design system work? And a lot of folks felt that also was true. And again, the same grain of salt probably is due here. Um, the conversation ranged. We started by just sort of like asking, the question of like, where does the responsibility lie? And so I don't know, Pegah, I know you've done a lot of thinking and some writing and some presentations on this. Can you just kind of like set up the context of ethics and design systems for folks who weren't able to attend that deep dive and maybe haven't thought too much about it?
Yeah. Um, so actually, I came into this topic of ethics and of design system from the AI side. Um, I set a goal for myself last year to learn more about AI ethics, and interestingly enough, I found a lot of parallels between AI systems and design systems in terms of ethics. Um, Now that being said, there are like the I've read books and I reflected on this topic a lot. Things that are shared are mainly shared is opacity, bias, and scale. So opacity means that sometimes design systems teams make decisions in kind of what would you call it, like a black box. Like not everyone has access to the why We do document the what, like, but we don't document why we made that decision and who influenced it. And a lot of times it could be something that is not necessarily ethical that seeped into this design decision based on some influence from a more powerful team in terms of organization influence. Um, so that's one parallel. The other parallel was bias because design system set the defaults, they set the norms. They basically are saying that this is what good looks like. And the last one is scale. Anything that scales, it by the nature, it has responsibility. So because it multiplies. So um, those parallels were kind of alarming to me, and I started getting very curious to see if anyone else in the community is thinking about that. And I was so thrilled to he- uh, for you to reach out and like being creating this space to actually discuss that and hear from others. And now I admit I know it's a complex topic, but yeah, it was really interesting to hear from others.
Yeah, it is complex. And I think we as a community in the deep dive very quickly got into the nuance that's involved here. One of the things that we talked about at the beginning was just this idea of like, whose responsibility is this? Like, I think we acknowledge that in an ideal scenario, there is an organization that is ethical, with leaders that are ethical, with directors and contributors that are all ethical and want the same things. But I think that's maybe we would all probably chime in and say that's probably not the reality that most of us live in, right? And so when we're unsure about those things, when there's not alignment from the top to the bottom in terms of like what ethics are and what is an ethical choice, where do you think the responsibility lies? Is this, I mean, you kind of hinted at this in your context, but like, how would you sort of articulate that for folks?
Yeah, I commented on LinkedIn that I think this responsibility falls on all of us. Uh, but through the discussion, I learned even more about this. I think someone brought up the spectrum of responsibility and advocacy and the tension between the business and the, I would say, design system team. So there are times like from one end to another end of the spectrum when a business and design system are aligned on ethical choices. In the middle is where um, basically the design system is not aligned with what uh, business is pushing for, the KPIs. And the other spectrum, I guess, is like we would agree on this is the unethical choice. Now, I wonder if I'm butchering this a little bit because this is the how I created a mental model for myself.
Mm-hmm.
But like the tricky part is where when business and design system don't align,
Yeah.
and that creates a lot of tension. And I feel like a lot of us design system folks uh, in the reality of our jobs, day-to-day jobs, feel that responsibility, but we don't have the vocabulary for it. We don't have the tools for it, the mental model. We don't even know. Someone mentioned we don't have a starting point, tactics. Um, I think, like at the very least, this I really love this conversation because it brought this topic to the surface, and even admitting that we don't have those tools is a good starting point.
I know that's so true, Pega. I love that. And we spent a lot of time kind of like batting around different ways to think about this, and you mentioned the spectrum idea. We had a couple different ideas for spectrums, from like what I'm showing one on screen here where we have like this idea of like, one end, just sort of like legal adherence, meaning like very basic ethical, yeah, positive decisions, all the way to the other end of the spectrum where we're not only respecting the user with the choices and the patterns that we embed in our products, but also guiding them toward more ethical choices, right? So like layers of ethics sort of kind of filtering in. And then of course we started to sketch out this idea of like what I think I heard you hinting at, which is like business decisions versus ethical decisions on like a quadrant, and of course it's like, yeah, when the ethical choice lines up with the business choice, that's easy, right? That's what we would all love to be in, but that's not always the case. And then of course the other side where it's like a bad ethical choice and a bad business decision. Hopefully nobody's doing that stuff. But then you have the gray areas, right? Where it's like, okay, the business wins by being unethical or ethics wins at the cost of business, right? So like there's not a simple answer to those two sort of gray area quadrants. And so, we had some really interesting conversation. I loved Ismail's point. He brought this idea up that I think he said, how did he say it? He said, he was talking about this idea that maybe there's a sort of like short term versus long term. And I think you were thinking about this too, Pegah, so
Yeah.
I'll let you explain it. But his comment, I think, was like, forcing, like with a dark pattern, forcing a user to make a choice to make a purchase or something now doesn't sort of solidify them as a long-term customer of yours. So while you may have a short-term business win, you maybe have a long-term business failure. And he was saying maybe there's ways that we could look at that and say, hey, like encouraging them to make the right choice now might encourage a stronger sort of long-term business health with them as a customer in the future. So again, it's hard to prove that, right? It's hard to know that, but that's, I think, what's at stake here. And how do you think about the sort of time horizon of all of this?
It's so true. I love that example. Also, I loved what you mentioned. You said like what we measure uh, tends to become what we deliver,
Hmm.
basically. And both of these bring me to the trust conversation.
Yeah.
Like obviously, a main part of it is time, the time horizon. Like some some of the impact is immediate, like accessibility, for example. The business can see the impact of it. Um, gaining more users. But like there are some other, wider ethical choices, like, for example, dark patterns or being overly persuasive. It's using certain patterns. That's what Ismail was
Yeah.
referring to. And those dark patterns may, in the short term, gain more users or like sales, but in the long run, it, it can hurt the trust
Yeah.
and user trust. Like my example was, for example, when I gave the speech at Into Design System, I asked the audience, how many of you use AI tools or ChatGPT, for example, on daily basis, and almost everyone in the audience raised their hand. And I then asked, how many of you, just keep your hand up if any of you would like fully trust that. And nobody kept their hand up. And that's the trust gap. That what I'm exactly trying to highlight here. We do use products without trusting them until the trust breaks. And that's when the business can hurt, because they in the long term they may lose. It's just like risk management
Yeah.
aspect to it too.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And what a good example. We talked about, so you mentioned accessibility there. We talked about sort of a deeper kind of accessibility in the area of like inclusion. There was the concept of dark and light patterns that we could embed. We talked, so I'm just thinking like what else, people listed things that were like contrast ratios, kind of hinting at accessibility, performance, the tone of error messages, the transparency in user flows, representation in images, like all of these things, along with things like environmental responsibility are all part of like the ethics that we can choose to embed good choices or bad choices into the system and scale those. I mean, that's a wide range of things that we have some say over, are there other things there that we didn't hit on, or like what are those kind of the ones that come to your mind too?
Yeah, when I was digging through the raw data, which I loved, by the way,
Hmm.
um, I started thinking of this in a little different ways. So I was thinking, okay, there are maybe another way we can look at this is from the uh, perspective of product, human, organization
Mm-hmm.
in terms of behaviors, how design system influence this. Obviously, accessibility and even inclusivity can fall under product. Um, so when we make decisions around, like, for example, toast was an example
Yeah.
that was mentioned on LinkedIn. Um, or yeah, like the ones that you mentioned, or like let's say like avatar, the default avatar. Are we saying this is the default human being, that image that we are choosing? Like there are like subtle, very nuanced areas that we should be mindful of that in terms of accessibility and inclusivity. But there are also a little wider, broader aspect to it that I'm interested to discuss those to see how much of it we should feel the ethical responsibility of, or
Mm-hmm.
and how much of that belongs to the overall org.
Yeah.
Um, I think, for example, human behaviors, when we set the boundaries, we set the guardrails, when we define governance models, the vision, like more, like when we try to operationalize some of those, they show up, for example, in, okay, the only design system, maybe as an example, only design system can have access and edit core tokens.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but we from my perspective, we need to allow for influence from the product, designers to be able to influence that, to give feedback. But if we gatekeep this too tightly, it becomes unethical. Like there are like some like aspects of ownership and governance that goes back into human layer, and like the emotional weight that
Mm-hmm.
is on the design system team, the design system maintainers, designers, engineers, and then obviously there is the organizational aspect to it, the whole organization values and the design system principles that we want them to align with these, and then it goes back to that
Yeah.
business and design system tension.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky, and we kind of acknowledged too that in some respects, there's the ability for some folks, who maybe have kind of a financial stability to be able to make a choice to leave an org because they don't align with those values, right? But there's also that is a bit of a privileged, position that some folks are in and not everybody is in, and so this conversation is we want to be careful with this, right? We're not saying you're a bad person if you can't make ethical choices and stand up against like an organization that maybe doesn't align with what you believe is true, because you need to pay your bills and you have to feed your family and things like this, right? So there's like a
Definitely.
lot of nuance here. So we're
Yes,
trying to come to this with a lot of grace and recognition that everybody's in a different, personal scenario too. Um,
exactly. And
so,
that's why I think it's
yeah,
like sorry to interrupt.
yep.
It's important to define where is the start and end of our responsibility
Mm-hmm.
as a design system team
Yeah.
in terms of ethics.
Yeah, say a little bit more about trust. I know you kind of hinted at this earlier, and I know that one of the things we saw in the data in that fourth question was that a lot of folks just don't know how to measure it, right? I mean, I don't think there was anybody who had like a very clear measure in the answers, right? So, um, I think we talked about it a lot in those answers as like it's sort of more like a feeling than it is a measurement. Which, okay, I get that that's probably where it's at right now, but maybe that's not enough. A lot of people referenced adoption, measuring adoption as a proxy for trust. But your point earlier makes it clear that like we'll use things even if we don't trust them until they break the trust intentionally or specifically. So that doesn't even really mean that there's trust, right? So like how are you thinking about this?
Yeah, this is a um, tough question, honestly, and I've been thinking about this. It's not that I have the I have resolved this, but I have taken a stab at it, I would say.
Yeah.
um, so it is true. Like when I was reading the results, it seems like everyone like is relying on them more on the vibe check, I would say, like,
Mm-hmm.
um, less questions or less hand holding is needed,
Mm-hmm.
or um, people like attending or not attending office hours. I mean, like, those are tricky. For example, if, like, let's say office hours, do you think if people are attending the office hours, they trust the system, or if they're not attending, which one of is this? If they're not attending, it could mean they don't have questions. It could mean that they don't trust the system. They don't
Yeah.
even want to go through those channels
Yeah.
um, to begin with. And so, but I think like trust is like really becoming more and more critical for us to measure because of um, AI entering our workflows,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's just like the overlap. That's what I in my presentation. I'm not gonna go deep into that. The overlap of AI systems and design system, it becomes super tricky. This is like multiplying the multipliers.
Yeah.
So it's just we should be a little more um, cautious of that.
Yeah.
Maybe a lot more cautious of that, actually.
Yeah. For sure.
So because, like, again, it goes back to what you mentioned quickly, I should say, what we measure tends to be what we deliver.
Yeah.
And for AI, for example, there is this concept of fitness function, and that's what AI function is measured based on. For example, if like um, they measure the maximum time on the platform versus maximum um healthy communication, like those create completely different result, like
Yeah.
delivery, right? So it's kind of the same for design system, and these so I was thinking maybe we could start thinking about how can we measure trust.
Yeah.
Is there a way we could have like a trust score? Now I have like developed mine. This is just again starting point. I was thinking maybe we can ask the user about reliability, transparency, inclusion, efficiency, and adoption
Mm-hmm.
to measure this. But I'm honestly really curious to see if there are better ways or if we can improve this.
Yeah. Oh man, there's so much to dig into here. Pega, I want to respect your time and just, I've said it a bunch of times, but thank you so much for bringing this topic, such an important topic for us to be thinking about. I feel like we've only scratched the surface here. So there's a lot of work for us to do as a community to kind of continue to unpack this and figure out how it will impact our daily work. I think you're right. The trust score, this idea of like sort of some aggregate of other metrics that we can sort of hopefully take away as a meaning of like, do people actually trust the system, trust the team building the system, I think is a really good starting point. But thank you so much for being here, for bringing this topic, and for giving me so much time today on these video calls. I really appreciate you.
Oh, I loved it. I truly enjoyed it. And thank you so much again for creating this space. And I would say sometimes the question is even more important than the answer. And I'm so happy we can start questioning some things, some assumptions here.
That's such a good point, Pega. Thank you so much. And thanks, everybody.